Hello, and welcome back to Reunited States, a podcast where we aim to bring back civil discourse and rational discussion into our everyday political lives. From Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig.
And from Manchester, New Hampshire, I am Jesse Saywell.
And it is Wednesday, November 6th, the day after Election Day, and we have a very good idea of who is going to become the next President of the United States. And unfortunately, not to our surprise, it is in fact Republican candidate Donald J. Trump. Now, I speak for both of us here when I say that neither of us are particularly enthused at this news. Both of us proud to say we voted for Kamala Harris, and we were hopeful for her campaign to triumph. But alas, the numbers speak for themselves. And so here we are. So you might have to forgive us as emotions are a little high here and things are a little tense. But we'll try our best here to have a rational and logical discussion over what happened and why it happened, and maybe even where to go from here.
Yeah. So I'm going to read off something that I posted earlier today, and some of you probably have already read this, so I hope you'll bear with us because we do have a lot that we're going to get into today. We're going to talk about a variety of things, obviously the majority being how did this happen and what comes next. But I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the pain that a lot of us are feeling around what has happened. So I'm just going to go ahead and read this off because I don't think that I can, on the cuff, give you guys a better prognosis on where we stand right now. But here we go. Y'all know me. Y'all know how much I love being right. It's hubris, it's ego, it's a character flaw. I know. But never in my life have I wished so hard to be wrong. But I wasn't. Not this time. The polls aren't trash. They're not wrong. They're not manipulated. Not if you know which ones to look at. Real, unbiased polling data followed the exact same trends of 2016 and 2020. Even at the height of her surge, Kamala Harris was likely never in strong enough position to win. We're going to go into why this happened. We're also going to go into more detail on what to expect in the second era of a Trump presidency. But I want to say this first. Do not succumb to your anger and despair. It's easier said than done, I understand that, but do not resort to the burning of bridges that has marked the road to this point. Don't spend your energy attacking the people who voted differently from you, but direct that energy towards helping and protecting the people who will need it the most. Small acts of kindness will go a long way right now. The people who you are angry at, the ones who actually deserve it, thrive on your tears. Your angry posts do not awaken or offend them. They have been waiting 8 years for another day like today. Don't give them any added satisfaction. It will only make things worse. And try as hard as you can not to direct your anger in blanket statements that scapegoat groups of people. It is understandable to be angry at men. But remember that millions of them, many probably who are in your life, did not want this to happen and did what they could to prevent it. Many of them are now in danger themselves. Remember that there are millions of people who live in quote-unquote red states that do not approve of what is happening. And many of them are among the most vulnerable members of our society. They are on the front lines of our struggle against inequality and injustice. Remember that winning requires bringing people back in, not pushing them away. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to sugarcoat the situation. We've all had plenty of that already. The coming months and years are going to be unlike anything we've ever seen. There is real danger for many people in the country, and free and fair elections as a means of responding to said danger are no longer a guarantee. Elections have consequences, and there are dark days ahead. But I'm reminded today of the quote by the great John Lewis, and I hope it brings you comfort as it has for me. Quote, "We used to say that ours is not the struggle of one day, 1 week, or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes. And each one of us, in every generation, must do our part. And if we believe in the change we seek, then it is easy to commit to doing all we can, because the responsibility is ours alone to build a better society and a more peaceful world." End quote. So that's what I got for you. I walked into that voting booth yesterday. I was at the local polling place. I walked into the gym, and I got emotional. And I audibly said out loud, I said, I don't want this to be the last time I vote in a free election. And I am concerned that that's exactly what has just happened. And so I recognize that we're all in a place of despair right now, and I want to be able to give you all kind of this we're going to be okay moment. Things are not going to be okay. And to tell you all that they're going to be okay, especially coming from my place of privilege, as a straight white man in America, would be disrespectful and insulting to your intelligence. Things are not going to be okay. Things are going to be really, really difficult, and we're going to be dealing with the repercussions of this probably for the rest of our lives, if not our children's lives, and so on and so forth. And it's not just about one election or one man. It is about the long-lasting tradition of democracy that has existed in this country. The thing that really inspired me to be a political person, and that is the idea of America, the idea of a multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy in which we could chart a path forward for everyone. And it was slow, and it was a slog, and it was difficult, and it wasn't easy. And I get why that's frustrating to people. I get why, if you don't understand how the levers of government work, that you would sit there and you would say, what has democracy done for me lately? But the alternative, I've seen the alternative. I've been to countries around the world that people have died in the efforts to reach what we have, and hopefully, God, I hope we'll be able to maintain in this country, which is a democracy in which we do have a say in what happens next.
You have to think about the rights that we have, the rights that we take for granted. You look around the world to countries that we point to as examples of what not to do, places that will shoot you on the spot for having an opinion that differs from those in charge. We are so blessed in this country to have the right to rally, the right to free speech, to protest against those in power that we disagree with. We've done it for generations. It's what started our country. And now that very right is being threatened. People voted. A majority of people in this country voted for a candidate who threatened publicly to take that right away. He said on more than one occasion that he will silence his dissenters, that he will revoke the media licenses of journalists who disagree with him, who he does not see eye to eye. He will silence them. He has threatened to send out the National Guard to get rid of protesters. The National Guard. Tell me, how many degrees of separation are we now from what China has done in Tiananmen Square? How much closer are we now to what Russia does to literally anyone who even writes an op-ed criticizing Putin? I'll tell you what happens. They die. They're killed. Or worse. And we have elected someone who is publicly supported taking one step closer to being one step closer to that. God, I love this country. Love being here. But the foundations of our country, are being threatened. And we are so blind that we voted for the very person who is threatening them. Why can't we see that? Why can't we see the threat before our very eyes? Why are we so blinded by otherism, by hate, that we are taking the side of a person that stands for everything that America is not? Who stands with, who praises those that we call our enemy? Russia, China, North Korea. How did we get here? It bewilders me. I wish I could say it bewilders me. I wish I could say that, but the unfortunate truth is that it was there the whole time. Anger and hate and otherism is just the thing that fuels us more than anything else, and I guess it always was. But now we stand here on the precipice of a government never before seen in our history that threatens to take away our rights, strip away the things that makes us American.
They published it in a document. They put it out there for you to read. And today, what are they saying? Joke's on you. Now that the election is over, yeah, Project 2025, that's the plan. That's literally one of the tweets from the people who crafted Project 2025. Ends with LOL. These are the types of people that we are up against, that are maneuvering this, and these are the types of people that you need to be fighting back against. It's not your aunt and uncle who have been hoodwinked by this. I understand the instinct. I understand the deep personal animosity that comes from watching someone vote against your humanity. I can't understand it personally. Of course I can't. I don't come from that, but these are issues that are very close to home for me, in my family, in my friends, in my life. So I get it. But what is the path forward? And that's what we have to try and figure out now, is what is the path forward for us? Yeah, we're going to give you an answer we're going to try and give you some perspective on what the next couple years are going to look like. Maybe some options we have for getting through them. But one thing I know that won't help is responding to this the way that Trump wants us to respond. And that sounds a little like a hippie mentality sort of thing, and it sounds like something that I might have eye-rolled at one point in time, but I promise you, we're doing half the work for Donald Trump in terms of dividing the nation. That is a two-way street. And if we don't take the steps to try and bring people back into the fold, all we are doing is pushing them further and further and further away into his direction. And the more people we lose who are willing to stand with that, the harder our struggle becomes to reach the goals that we all have, which is an equitable society. And it may be out of reach now. It might. I don't know. We're going to find out. But we are facing the greatest challenge that this country has ever faced. Martin Luther King said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Barack Obama said, "Progress isn't always a straight line." I'm holding on to those sentiments, but right now it feels like the arc of the moral universe is not bending towards justice, and the line feels like it's going the other direction. So, Tyler, I want to talk about why this happened. I do think that for a lot of people, this was a shock. I, of course, don't think it should have been a shock because I have been screaming about it for years. As recently as yesterday, I got all kinds of crap from people, and I get it. I do get it. But I got all kinds of crap for my prediction about, oh, no, you're not looking at the data. It's going to be a blue tsunami. And, oh, did you see the Iowa poll over the weekend? And where are you getting your numbers? People telling me there is a 0% chance that what you have predicted is going to come to pass. Well, funny. Here we are. I'm not saying that necessarily would have changed the electorate, but it is really important to understand and to look at this and see, wow, we live in silos. Because I'm not a genius, I'm not a soothsayer, that's not what I am. I'm literally just telling you information that is readily available to you outside of your bubbles, outside of your MAGA bubble, and outside of your left-wing MSNBC kind of bubble. Because I watch those things too, for the record. I tune in. I watch MSNBC. I watched MSNBC last night, and I sat there for a little bit of time watching the results come in, and I just said, this is the rosiest picture I have ever heard of what is clearly going to be a terrible night for Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party. They tell you what you want to hear. They are selling you on hearing what makes you comfortable, but not necessarily what is the truth right now. And that frustrates me immensely. And so I want us to be able to give you guys perspective on this. So what happened? What do I think happened, for what that's worth? And I hope you'll give me some leeway, because I have a pretty good track record now. Sorry, just going to say it. I opened with ego, and I'm kind of tired of people telling me that I'm stupid. So Harris did not run a perfect campaign. She ran a largely good campaign. She did not run a perfect campaign. The first mistake, though, is not Harris. It's Joe Biden. Joe Biden should not have run for re-election, and the party should not have sat there and stood by and just said, yup. It was insane. It was ignoring all the noise that was on the ground, everything from younger voters to older voters saying this man is too old to run for re-election and we are not happy with this. And we waited too long. We waited so long until it was finally in front of us and it was unavoidable in that debate stage. And then we said, oh my God, we've got to make a change. And I applaud the party for making the change. But you only had one option at that point. And you only had one option because, as I said at the time, if you were to jump over the first female vice president, the highest serving woman in the history of our nation, an accomplished woman I really like and respect, a former senator, attorney general, etc., etc., etc. First black woman in the executive branch, the first South Asian woman. Like, if you jump over that, you're the Democratic Party, if you coronate someone over that, a white man or a white woman, anyone over that, then all of a sudden you've lost the election. So there was no choice other than Kamala Harris. There was no way to kind of work around Harris, as several people proposed in the beginning, and even myself kind of wanted to explore whether that was an option because, as I said, immediately, within minutes, before even the debate was done, I had posted about Joe Biden, and I said that Joe Biden is not a viable candidate and Kamala Harris is not a viable candidate. And most of that is not her fault. We're going to talk about misogyny. We're going to talk about race. We're going to talk about the roles that played in what has taken place. And to be clear, both of those are significant factors in what happened. But I don't want to start with that because that's the easy stuff. And that's the stuff that in the electorate, it's very easy to say, look at us, we're a racist country, we're a sexist country. And again, there's a lot of truth to aspects of that. It's pretty clear. But we're deflecting blame from the Democratic Party. If you look back at the 2020 primary, Joe Biden was the only major candidate who did not publicly back Medicare for all. He refused to support abolishing ICE. He refused to support decriminalizing the border. And when our passions were at our highest in the summer of 2020, he refused to support defund the police. And how did the majority of Democrats respond? By electing him as the nominee and by electing him president. And this is a critical point to understand. Joe Biden ran ahead of congressional and Senate Democrats in that election. We lost seats in the House of Representatives in 2020 in districts that Joe Biden won. We lost winnable Senate seats in that election in North Carolina and Maine. And the data showed that defund the police was a critical reason as to why we lost those elections. Joe Biden was seen as the more mainstream candidate, whereas congressional Democrats were viewed as out of touch because so many of them were either adopting or refusing to actively reject policy positions from the far left that are wildly unpopular among the general electorate outside of blue cities. So flash forward to 2024. Kamala Harris now ran behind Senate and congressional Democrats. Why? Because the congressional Democrats in competitive races seemed more mainstream. They all actively ran campaigns that aimed towards the center, and many of them have actively rejected some of the most extreme policy positions from the fringe of the party. Kamala Harris tried to do so, but she's a California liberal who ran a horribly misguided campaign for president 5 years ago in which she tried to out-Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Again, I'm not trying to trash progressive policies, but I'm saying that progressives don't win competitive districts. They are immensely unpopular outside of the blue bubbles. So what are the issues that hindered Kamala Harris? First is the border. She simply could not admit that they messed up the border, and they did. All you needed to say was, we were trying to undo the cruelty of the previous administration, and in doing so we went too far, and we are already working to fix it, and you can do that in a compassionate way that also protects the security of the border. Border was a gigantic issue. The second set of issues that really scared people about Democrats this election, honestly, it's a much more difficult thing to talk about, relate to transgender issues. Now, I want to be clear first and foremost. Transgender people are real, they exist, and they are under assault in this country and need to be protected. This is not about transgender people. This next point is about the way that the party has discussed and communicated issues relating to transgender rights and those issues. I believe that the far left of this country has unintentionally made it more dangerous for trans people by not having open discussions about where some of the lines are drawn, specifically when it comes to minors. Should children be allowed to have permanent gender-affirming surgeries? I think that most people, if they are being honest, would say no. And if you look at other Western nations, including the nations that progressives love to model themselves after, they have looked at the data and said, no, this is actually worse for the mental health of the child. It is not inherently transphobic to question whether children should be allowed to have these surgeries. It is not inherently transphobic to question whether trans athletes should be allowed to participate in women's sports. I recognize that this is a very niche issue, but it feels so much more close to home for the average parent in this country who doesn't pay attention to politics and does not understand transgenderism. But on the far left, these discussions have been framed in a way that any questioning of the issue is immediately labeled as transphobic. And by eliminating the discussion like that, you don't allow people to grow and learn. And because of this, it has made it so the only people engaging in the discussion are the far left and the far right. And the far right are transphobic. And if you leave them to dictate the discussion, they're going to make it seem like a dangerous, scary issue, when really these should be civil discussions. There are people in the middle who can be swayed if we talk reasonably with them about these issues. But the extremes don't do that, and the far left extremes seem silly sometimes. The positions seem silly. And the world is changing very quickly. We have to understand that some people don't change that quickly. And you have to be gentle in the way you engage with them and compassionate with them. So yes, Democrats were completely right in saying that the far right is more dangerous, that one party wants to dismantle democracy. But that seems far more theoretical to your average non-political person than one party allows millions of people into the country, decriminalizes shoplifting, hates the police, and tells me I'm stupid for thinking it's unfair that a transgender athlete is beating my niece in a track meet. Again, do I think these should be the bigger issues? Of course not. I think democracy is infinitely more important than any of those issues. But it doesn't feel nearly as close to home. It doesn't feel as real to the average voter. And because of her 2020 campaign, and her refusal to call out and clarify some of these positions on the far left, Kamala Harris was viewed as the more dangerous candidate to people who don't pay attention to politics. So we can talk about the racism factor, which was real. We can talk about the sexism factor, which was real. But if you look at the Senate races in states she lost, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, female Democratic candidates won or are on track to win in all three of those states that Kamala Harris lost. Arizona, a second-generation Latino, is on track to win the Senate race in that state, and Kamala Harris is going to lose that state. I get that we're talking about separate jobs in the presidency and the Senate, but clearly the issue isn't solely racism and sexism.
I do want to go back to the misogyny piece for a second, though, because I know it's not everything. I know it's not the full picture. I know it's not the only reason she lost, and it might not even be the biggest reason she lost, and I'll get into that in a bit too. But it is a very important thing to talk about. Maybe not because of the numbers per se, but because of what this could mean strategically for the Democratic Party moving forward. Because if you're the Democratic Party and you're looking at our presidential record, we've now put two strong, solid female candidates as Democratic frontrunners for president in the last 8 years, and both of them lost. So what does that tell you? If you're in the DNC war room and you're looking at things strategically, you're looking at the numbers, I'll tell you what it tells me. It tells me that for some reason, a female at the top of the Democratic ticket loses elections. Again, I'm not saying it's because it's a female, though it is certainly a reason. And there are many polls out there that will show you that they're a big reason why Harris is losing among Black and Latino men is the fact that she's a woman. And so you're a Democratic Party and you look at that and it dissuades you. It dissuades you from wanting to put forward a female candidate in the future because the numbers are now telling you that it's a bad idea. That's the part that scares me about this. When you talk about the misogyny piece and what it means, I'm afraid that the results of this election is going to steer the Democratic Party away from their progressive roots, what they're trying to do. They're going to go back to nominating a man. They're probably going to go back to Biden and say the only way we can win is a centrist man, and probably a centrist white man, to be safe. It's really effed up, man. But I fear that that's going to be the takeaway, which is awful. But when you play the political game, you got to play it by the numbers. It's the only way to win. Republicans know this. That's why they win. They play the game right. They know that relying on otherism and fear, demonizing migrants and anyone that isn't quote unquote American, they know this wins because people agree. People eat it all up. And it wins them an election. It gives them results. So of course they're going to keep doing that. And unfortunately, it feels like every time the Democratic Party wants to lean further left, they lose. They get burned. And that's going to dissuade them from doing that in the future. It's going to dissuade them from nominating a woman. It's going to dissuade them from adopting progressive ideas onto their platform because the Republicans make too good of a job getting people to be afraid of those things, afraid of Medicare for all, afraid of high taxes on the rich, afraid of free school lunches, for God's sake, afraid of transgender rights. If you ask me, that we're never going to get forward, because the issues that I feel we need to adopt and we need to keep pushing forward for true progress in this country are losing ideas. And the results of this election, the results of the Donald Trump rhetoric, has only further blocked that progress and prevented it from happening now and, dare I say, for the foreseeable future. It saddens me, but that's just what the results say.
I don't want to say that we can only run men going forward, but you're absolutely right. We are a more misogynistic country than most of our Western counterparts, and there's a whole variety of reasons for that. But the real shame of it is that girls now, young girls and women, are growing up in a society in which they are uncertain whether they can achieve the top job. And that continues, and that's going to go on for at least another generation. I think it's pretty clear, yeah, you're right, that the first female president, if there's a female president, I think it will come from the right. It'll come from like a Carrie Lake style figure, not Carrie Lake, but a figure of that magnitude. And the crazy thing is, just going off of this, if the Republican Party had nominated Nikki Haley, which by all rights they should have, I mean, I guess this has worked out for them, but if they had nominated Nikki Haley would have won by more. I do believe that. That's the argument in which I say that this was not entirely about gender. Nikki Haley would have won by more. Even against Joe Biden, she would have won, just based on a trust in who she is, because they view her as a moderate candidate, and that the challenge right now is that so many people on the left have made gender into an issue that makes a lot of people afraid. And they have, in large part, villainized masculinity. And I don't blame them, because toxic masculinity is real, it is prevalent in society, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, it has caused so many problems and continues to cause so many problems, and it is a huge portion of the reason why Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States. But simply writing off men as all toxically masculine doesn't create a welcoming environment to welcome any of them into your coalition. And I hate to break it to you, but you need men. And the Democrats have not done a good job of appealing to men without college degrees, which is a huge growing portion of the population, and has not appealed in general to people without college degrees. That's one of the big things. You've got a realignment in politics right now that is splitting on the issues of gender and an issue of, do you have a college degree or do you not? And the people who do not feel like every door is closed in their face right now, and they're not entirely wrong. And the Democratic Party hasn't spent very much time saying, okay, how do we empower these working people who and put a plan forward for them, specifically for working class men?
It's so much harder for Democrats to reach these rural voters with their message, because their message is so much more complicated. And the reality is, a majority of these individuals who vehemently support Trump are uneducated. And the message of fear and the message of otherism is very, very easy for uneducated people to understand. It's a very simple message and a very effective one at that, especially for those who have not had the opportunity to go to college or to travel or to see other places in the world or in their country. They don't have that perspective. And it's not an inherently bad thing, but it does make them a lot more susceptible to adopting that rhetoric. And like, what's the Democratic message? I mean, we could talk about our policy, because I do believe that Democratic policy, on average, is a lot more helpful for these individuals than conservative policy is. By nature of like the platform of the Liberal Party, the past 10 plus years, it is designed to benefit the poor working class. But it's so hard to communicate that because they're not going to understand you when you start going into the weeds about how your policy helps, because like you've already lost them when you're talking about specific things like that. There's a language barrier in education. And so they can't reach the same crowd with the same simple message like the Republicans can with their message of really otherism and fear. Fear over communism, all these things.
But it's not about what they're doing for them. I don't believe they're doing enough, but it's not about what they're doing. It's how you talk to them. And it is, are you demonizing them? And young men, whether or not it is fair or not, they feel demonized. They feel like they have been, like the blame for a lot of things in society have been thrown on them. And quite frankly, you and I would both agree that in many cases that is fair blame. But when you engage with them, and it's what I talked about earlier, you can't just paint a coat on all men and say, oh, we hate all men now because Trump won and he won 60+% of men. Millions and millions and millions of men voted against him. And as such, like, I'm not saying that they deserve a medal. That's not what we're talking about. I'm saying that to just paint a picture, as many people have done, specifically on the far left, that like all the problems in the world are because of men. Did you hear Kamala Harris at one point in time actually make a statement in which she said, I care about young men? Like, not I care about working class people, I care about young people. Did you hear her at any point in time say, I care about young men? It is political suicide right now for people in the Democratic Party to say those words, because there is a whole group of people who get upset about that and somehow think that empowering men means disenfranchising women. Okay, but that's never been the case. Empathy is not a zero-sum game. If you empower African Americans, that did not hurt white people in the civil rights movement. When we empower LGBTQ people to get married, that did not hurt heteronormative marriage. Empowering young men does not inherently disenfranchise or take away from the success that we've seen and want to continue to see and continue to empower for young women and women in general. And so I get it. I get that there is this stigma around it, but she needed to actively say, she needed to call someone out, someone who's sitting there and being like, men are the problem. She needed to be like, no, men are not the problem. Stop scapegoating men. That's what she needed to say. At some point in time, there needed to be a push. There needed to be some sort of bill put up by Biden in the last couple of years, something he could even just talk about and say, this is a bill that is specifically targeting young working class, non-college educated men. And it wouldn't have passed. Whatever he would have put forward wouldn't have passed, because Republicans would never work on it with him. But just to be able to say that they put it forward that's what Republicans have been doing to win elections for years and years and years and years and years. So, no, I don't think that would have suddenly swung the lever and all of a sudden you would have seen a majority of men voting for Kamala Harris. No, I don't believe that. But we're talking about margins here in these states of a few percentage points. Really, really small margins that we lost. To me, that's what I see. When I look at my hometown, those are the people that I see who are especially frustrated, who 10 years ago weren't political. Even in Trump's first run, weren't political. Maybe even in 2020, weren't political, and now are actively and vocally political because they feel like they're under attack, or that they are not, that somehow their masculinity is being labeled as bad. And they look at Trump as being the savior of that. And that's fucked up, it's wrong. But why didn't she go on Joe Rogan's podcast? I think he's an asshole. But why? Trump went on Joe Rogan's podcast. Kamala didn't. She was invited and turned it down. Why? How stupid of a decision the campaign made. I'm not saying this at Kamala Harris specifically, because I suspect this was a joint decision within the campaign. Why on earth the Democratic Party and the campaign would not say, we need to reach these people. It's time to get her on this podcast and make her sound like a rational person.
Joe Rogan endorsed Trump, like, right before the election.
Of course he did, because Kamala never spoke with him. I mean, he probably would have either way. I don't know.
And listen, it makes no sense to me why she wouldn't go on Joe Rogan's show. Think what you will about the guy. On his podcast, he is fair and open with his guests. He does give them a platform to speak their mind. And he would have done this for Kamala if she went on the show.
Yeah, he's not disrespectful of his guests in the way that you saw Brett Baer or, Fox News or any of these people in that interview, which was just a debacle. I can't understand why she would decline it. And it's why the Democrats are going to continue to struggle with men until they reform. And yeah, it's heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking that it probably won't be a female candidate at the top of the ticket. In 4 years, 8 years, I don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But I suspect the devastation of this is going to be a lasting stain in the psyche of young women for a long time that are going to believe now that their country does not believe them to be worthy. And it's wrong. It's just so unbelievably wrong. And it's so heartbreaking. And I can't stress enough how devastating that is to have seen it now twice with two of the most competent, qualified people losing to this man.
That's exactly my point. And beyond that, I do want to say that there is one other very large topic, an elephant in the room, if you will, that hurt the Harris campaign on multiple fronts. And that is the war in Gaza. We're not here to talk about our stance on the war or anything like that. It's a very hotly contested issue, and everyone has the right to feel a certain way about this specific crisis that's happening across the world. But what we do want to talk about is the effect that an issue like that has on American politics and what the effect that we've seen it have on the 2024 race. Because, like it or not, whatever your stance is, the missteps that the Harris campaign had in addressing the crisis in Gaza cost them nearly the entire campaign, I would argue. It is such an important subject within specifically the left, because we have to understand the right doesn't really care about this issue the way the left does. They don't. Trump is unapologetically pro-Israel. He's proud to say it. He says Bibi Netanyahu is his best bud. He has, on record, said he would let Netanyahu finish the job. They support him either way on this issue. The entire right supports that philosophy. It's not like the left where we have this split in the degree of importance that the issue has on certain voters. We have groups, especially on the far left, that are extremely pro-Palestine. And it means a lot to them for a candidate to come out and support a group of individuals that are, currently on the losing end of a war. And that is completely fine. But if you remember, Biden's response to the attacks in Gaza, both the attacks in Israel and the attacks in Gaza, were very, very critically received. It led to a drop in his popularity ratings, especially on the left. He did not react fast enough. His refusal to fully support one side or another the way that his supporters wanted him to. And the thing is, as his VP, Kamala Harris is deeply tied to those decisions, whether she wanted to be or not. In the eyes of the public, you share the responsibility of the decisions of a certain cabinet. And Harris is no different in this case. And it cost her. We saw a lot of anti-Harris campaigning going on from the left, from the far left, saying that she supports genocide, all these things, because she did not take quick enough action on taking a stance on this topic. I would tell you that amongst young supporters, a lot of them were turned away from the Harris campaign and continue to be so, and likely didn't even vote for her because of this issue. We even saw it with her VP pick. You said this many times before, that her VP should have been Josh Shapiro. By every political strategic metric, he was the choice. He was a popular governor of the most important swing state in the election. We knew it was going to be the most important swing state in the election before she even became the candidate. The fact that we had a Democratic popular governor in that seat was like basically a free handout to us. If we would have picked them, that wins the state.
And if I may, people say, oh, well, this is, vice presidents that pick very rarely swings, an election. Since 1960, that has not been tested in a competitive election, in a competitive swing state. It hasn't been tested. So that whole, vice presidents don't win you their state. Yeah, because they're generally not from competitive states, or it's a landslide election. It has never been tested in a close election. And so that frustrates me, because I do genuinely believe that if Kamala Harris had chosen Josh Shapiro, she would have won the state of Pennsylvania. And it's not just because he's the governor of Pennsylvania. It is because he is a more moderate, mainstream candidate with a mainstream traditional Democratic record. And Kamala Harris was viewed as a California liberal. And her campaign in 2020 was really damaging to her potential to ever be a candidate for a federal office at the top of a ticket, because it went so far to the left that it scared people, and then she refused to back away from so many of those positions. And the Biden administration, was rather progressive in the way that it approached a lot of things. She needed to separate herself from Biden. I don't think she did. I mean, they asked her on The View, and I think this was damning. They asked her, and I know an interview on The View, how could that be damning? It was damning, because it played everywhere. They asked you, what would you do differently from the Biden administration? She said, nothing comes to mind. It was a horrible answer. Her aides knew it and were already trying to clean it up before she even got off the stage. It was an atrocious answer. You have to answer something. You could have mentioned Gaza.
That would have been the opportunity to say, yeah, I would have called for a ceasefire earlier. Anything to separate her from the very obviously destructive response, or non-response rather, that the Biden administration had.
And all that comes down to is just a lack of visible empathy. Most people, most sensible people, would agree that what happened on October 7th of 2023 was horrific and disgusting, and it warranted a response, that Israel does have a right to respond to an attack like that. But the scale of the attack matters. The scale of the response matters, especially in a situation like this. So it was very fair that people were upset about the scale of the response. What potentially is unfair, though, was that before she even made the decision of Tim Walz over Josh Shapiro, there were far-left groups that were promoting websites called Genocide Josh, simply because his last name is Shapiro and he is a Jewish man, I suppose. That is anti-Semitism. I'm sorry, that is anti-Semitism. It is not anti-Semitism to criticize Israel, Netanyahu, but it is anti-Semitism to lump in Shapiro with Netanyahu. And you can say, I disagreed with his policies on this, this, and this. Yes, of course, that is fair. But his policies are not distinguishable from Tim Walz or Mark Kelly in terms of how they have talked about the subject and the issue. Harris had a chance to buck the far left in picking Josh Shapiro and saying, you know what? He's a good governor. He's a smart guy. He's a compassionate human. Picking a Jewish man doesn't mean that I'm supporting genocide. That's ridiculous. And she had a chance to do that, and that would have won over a lot of people, and the centrism would have made her seem a safer candidate to people in some of these Rust Belt states.
And yeah, like, Tim Walz is fine, but Tim Walz was not the candidate she needed to win the support that she was losing.
She picked a progressive governor whose policies were very clearly progressive, who I like. I think he's a nice guy. But she picked a nice guy and said, yeah, he'll win over people because he's a guy and he wears plaid. That is out of touch. That is out of touch. And Moderates in Pennsylvania love Josh Shapiro. He's got a nearly 60% approval rating among the population in Pennsylvania. You cannot tell me that that wouldn't have made a difference in a state that was so tightly contested. And people are like, oh, well, he was campaigning for her. There is a difference between somebody campaigning for someone. Barack Obama campaigned for, Michelle Obama is immensely popular. Like, there's a difference between who campaigns for you and who is on your ticket. And people wanted to believe that there was a moderate voice in the room where decisions are happening. And there simply wasn't. If you look at Tim Walz, if you look at his record, he does not strike anyone as like the type of strength. That debate with, as we said before, he didn't really project strength to a ticket that really needed strength. Tell me Josh Shapiro doesn't project strength in some capacity, like competency, youthful competence. And so you wasted the best weapon that you had, you wasted because of fear of certain segments of the far left that do need to be called out. Because again, criticizing Israel is one thing, but anti-Semitic rhetoric is another, and there is a line. There is a line that has to be drawn, and some people have been crossing it. And it impacted the election, and it very well may have been a deciding factor in the election. I think you make a great point on that front.
Yeah, it's one of these things where I don't want to say that being a single issue voter is particularly a bad thing, but there is still the bigger picture that we should be looking at. Even if you are that single issue person, for a lot of these individuals is saying, well, we can't support genocide, and that's why we can't vote for Kamala Harris. And they'll say, I'll vote third party, or I just won't vote at all. And the reality is, by making that decision, you are allowing a vote in favor of Donald J. Trump.
And Donald J. Trump, you want to talk about genocide. What Donald J.
Seriously.
Trump is going to enable in Gaza is going to be horrific. It's going to be absolutely horrific.
Right. And you can't say, oh, I didn't vote for him. It's not like I support his ideas. But the reality is that by not voting for one candidate and voting for either third party or something else, this is a two-party system, whether you like it or not. I know that's a problem. We agree that's a problem. It shouldn't be a two-party system. But it is. That's the reality. Not voting for one person allows the other person to win. That is the reality of our political system currently, whether you like that or not, whether you want that to be changed or not.
Yes.
It's the reality of the current nature of politics in the United States. It's very frustrating, the lack of, I would say, like political strategy that exists.
It's specifically on the far left, because that is an issue. The lack of strategy is specifically on the far left. The far right, absolutely batshit crazy on a lot of issues, pretty much all the issues in my personal opinion. But they are more strategic. They do understand, and if you look at the Project 2025 thing I said earlier, they said, nope, we're not associated with Donald Trump. Nope, nope, nope. And then he gets elected. JK, LOL. This is the platform. They are strategic. And liberals, in general, for a long time, they hate the game. That's what I hear more than anything is people talk to me and they're like, I hate the game of politics. I get it. I get that you hate the game. But if you abstain from the game, then you let them win. Abstaining is not you winning. All right. Should we move into things we can all agree on? I'm going to be short. We can all agree. Stop asking me for money. Especially on the day of the election or the day after the election. Please, stop asking me for money. I don't care what celebrity texts me. I don't care what B-list person in Democratic politics texts me. Amy Klobuchar, don't text me asking to donate to Kamala Harris. Really? Like, you think that Amy Klobuchar, of all people, is going to convince me to donate? Tim Walz here, Ken Burns here, Jimmy Kimmel here. This is ridiculous. Stop asking me for money. And certainly the day of the election, how stupid do you think I am? Honestly, just stop. That's all I got for you.
Well, hey, piggybacking from last week, if our elections were a lot shorter, they wouldn't need all the money from us.
Could not agree more.
My things we can all agree on. I'm going to go a little out there here, but I believe we should be looking into further legislation that bans partisan campaign materials and memorabilia from voting locations. I just feel like the presence of these things alone, even walking to and around the voting location, can be enough to scare away certain individuals from voting a certain way. And I don't think that's very fair because, like, the voting booth is supposed to be like this sacred place. Dare I say, it's a safe space for you to go in and feel like you have the power to make the choice that you want to make without influence, without fear, without anyone looking at you. You know, that's like the principle of voting.
I agree, and I hope that if that's the issue we have with elections going forward, I would be very happy because I agree. I think it's a great point. Just hoping that we continue to have free and fair elections to vote in going forward. Next week, we will be talking about kind of what comes next. Scary things to talk about, but not just what comes next and what to expect, but also what can you do to help out the resistance of fascism, which we are very concerned that we're on the verge of seeing come to power in some capacity. So make sure that you tune in, hold strong. I know that this is a difficult time, and remember, just please don't make blanket statements about people. Don't forget, you wouldn't want somebody to throw you into a box with, a broad stroke. Don't do that to others. Don't turn on your family members right now. That is not productive. It feels good in the moment. I understand it feels good in the moment, but it's not productive. And we have to find a way through this. And that's not going to be the way. I promise it's not going to be the way.
Couldn't agree more, and we'll definitely be getting more into that in detail next week. But for all you listeners at home, we will be here every week. With that, from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig.
And from Manchester, New Hampshire, I'm Jesse Saywell.
And this has been Reunited States. We'll see you guys next week.